Hey guys, it's Dan Martin and it's on education, and today we are going to be talking about the important topic of teacher shortages. And we will also discuss maybe some of the reasons behind the shortages that we're experiencing today. And the first thing that we'll be talking about is a paper that was on the 74million.org webpage. And it's entitled "A National Teacher Shortage, ? New research reveals vastly different realities between states and regions." And the authors of this paper are Nugent from Kansas State University, Lamb from the same university, Kansas State, and a fellow by the last name Bruno from the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. And what they kind of concluded is that there are definitely teacher shortages, but they are more prevalent in certain areas of the country. And they state here, firstly, the data suggests that the pandemic has exacerbated shortages in specific teaching areas in some states that have faced persistent and well-documented shortages for years, creating a patchwork of different education realities in the United States that vary from district to district and across state lines. All right, and so let's take a look a little bit further in what they found. They said there are substantial teacher vacant positions in the United States, and for some states that is much higher than other states. It's just a question of how severe it is. Nugent, lead author on the working paper and education researcher at Kansas State University, says the pandemic has just exacerbated the situation that has already started to build up, just making matters worse in some states. And so he goes on to state that nationally, an estimated 36,504 full-time teaching positions are unfilled, with the number potentially as high as 52,800. All right, so this kind of struck me as odd right off the jump. Why is there such a broad range here, and what kind of data are they using? And they go as far as to admit in the paper that a lot of the data is incomplete and not exact in nature, and they're making some projections on their data. And he said it was also reported that there were some 163,000 unqualified teachers in positions. And so one of the things that kind of caught my eye here was if you really think about it, you can add this 36,504 to the 163,000, because really if you're putting an unqualified teacher in a position, basically it's unfilled. And so if in reality here, if you add these numbers up, you're just shy of 200,000 on the low end and 215,800 on the high end of unfilled positions. And so I think one needs to keep that in mind when looking at this data that they present. And then the title here of my slide is "Beware of Raw Numbers." Let's read what they say. They say the vacancy estimates from Nugent and co-author Lamb and Bruno are significantly lower than the 300,000 reported by the National Education Association and national media. The higher estimates includes non-teaching staff such as bus drivers and school counselors. All right, so really, 200,000 plus and 300,000, there's a difference there, and it's substantial. But you have a lot of support staff in schools, in public schools. You have bus drivers, you have custodians, you have guidance counselors, principals, assistant principals, and so there's a lot of support staff in our schools. And the support staff is equally important as the teachers, because you can't run a school without them. And I underlined here on my slide raw numbers. Okay, so they say the highest raw numbers of open teaching positions are concentrated in the South and Lower Atlantic, where about 22,000 positions are open, triple the picture in the Midwestern states. Alabama, which has 300,000 vacancies in 2020 and 21, sits in stark contrast to Illinois, where 1,700 positions were left unfilled. Okay, so one of the things that kind of caught my eye here, and they say Florida, Georgia, Mississippi also experienced high raw numbers of vacancies in 2021-22 per year, each missing at least 3,000 teachers. The thing about raw numbers is you have to kind of keep in mind that in areas where there's a higher concentration of teachers in high population areas, maybe you have 3 positions open and you have over 1,000 students in your district. But if you're in a smaller school district, maybe of only 100 students, if you have 3 vacancies, that's a whole lot more damaging to the school in percent per student. So I think one of the things that you have to keep in mind is that these raw numbers might not necessarily tell the effect of the vacancy. Really, it should be reported in vacancies per 100 student or some other measurement that takes into account the total populations of students involved and affected by the vacancy. And so these numbers didn't really mean a whole lot to me by looking at what they had stated. Okay, so I wanted to know, figure out how many teachers there were in the United States, and I was going to use that information to kind of put a percentage on the loss of teachers that we've had currently. And so looking at this data from thinkimpact.com, the title of the article is "How Many Teachers Are in the United States?" updated for 2022. And they state here that they're in the school year 2018 to 19, there are about 3,170,000 public school teachers. In the year the school year 19 to 20, there were 3,214,673 public school teachers. And in the year 2021, there was 3,197,000 public school teachers. And so they also projected out by the year 2029 that we would need 3,390,000. And that number really seems kind of low to me, considering the influx of migrants that we've had across the southern border. In this year alone, we have had over 2 million migrants come in, and I don't know the percentage of school-age children in that, but I would estimate that that would be a very large number of children that we will be responsible for educating in the future. But anyway, this was the numbers that they came up with. Some of them are projected and some of them are calculated. And so using these numbers, let's take a look and see perhaps what the percentage is for this 2020-21 year, what the percentage is of teachers that we've actually lost, or the percentage of unfilled vacancies, I guess we could say. Okay, so we're going to use this number of 3,197,000 public school teachers. If you look at that number and you look at the number from the previous year, the 2019-20 school year, we've lost approximately 17,673 teachers. So if you look at the number of unfilled vacancies and underfilled vacancies from the previous study from Brown University, we had about 200,000 unfilled positions. And so if you divide that by 3,197,000, you get a 6% shortage in the number of teachers. I was really unclear whether this 200,000 number also included private school teachers, but let's project out and say that it did. If it included the private school teachers, you'd have 200,000 divided by 3,684,000 teachers, and that would be a 5.4% vacancy. So this is where I get the number of between 5 and 6% shortage nationwide, if these numbers are anywhere close to right. And I've also seen studies that have said that the shortage is as much as 9%, and I've seen studies that say it's a shortage of only 4%. So take that with a grain of salt, and use that as a type of ballpark figure. Okay, so let's discuss some of the factors driving vacancies according to the working paper that was reported in Brown University. The one from the professors from Kansas State University, and also from the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. And so they say thousands of open posts does not mean that the teachers left the classroom in droves during the pandemic. What they said, rather, three trends are unfolding simultaneously. Teacher preparation programs face declining enrollment. Respect for interest in teaching has plummeted, and most districts expanded hiring beyond pre-pandemic numbers with federal relief aid. And so they, kind of have a mismatch of things going on, or confounding factors, they say. So let's talk about first interest in teaching plummeting. And so they report, they did a survey of their own. In 2019, they say that 60% of Americans graded their schools as an A or B, but after more than 2 years of disruption, 52% give those marks in the latest Education Net survey. So basically, in 2019, 60% said that they of the survey said that they give their school an A or B, but in 2021, only 52% did the same. So this was a concern about the perception of public schools, and they say that it kind of gives a confounding effect for people wanting to go into the profession. I certainly feel that that might be true. So the downward trend has been consistent between 2008, 2009, 2018, and 19 academic years. The number of people completing a teacher education program declined by almost a third. Traditional teacher preparation programs saw the largest decline, 35%, but alternative programs experienced drops too. And so this general trend of, and they're making the correlation here, and I don't know if you can make that scientifically or not, but the anecdotal evidence is that, the perception of schools going down as being good, and the enrollment in teacher preparation programs has decreased steadily over time, and even going as far back as, I think they had the data going back to 2008 and 2009. So yeah, so there you go. So this drop in teacher candidates because of the perception of schools, and then also increased hiring and federal aid for schools, they say is also a confounding problem. Okay, so these researchers kind of make the conclusion from their study that the shortages are worse in the South than the other part of the country, and I don't know if they can really make this case or not, because they're looking at raw data, the raw numbers, and they really don't have an idea of shortages per 100 students. So I think that their conclusion here that the shortages are mainly in the South is probably not a good one, and we're going to discuss another paper presented by the Vox group that kind of, at least anecdotally, reports teacher shortages all over the country, and in some of the Midwestern states that they report relatively have no shortages. That the shortages are very concerning to the educators in those regions. And so, just to kind of conclude here, they say that that public disrespect, low wages, and legislation restricting classroom content may help explain some of the pipeline challenges and high vacancies, particularly in the southern states. They say there's also been increased attention to what it means to be a teacher, particularly about what teachers can or cannot teach in the state, whether or not social emotional learning is an important issue. And we need to teach how teachers may not teach anything about racism in America, Nugent says. So, I'm having trouble with this. I don't buy it. They say that people want to teach about social issues, and that's why they're not going into the field. But I really don't buy it. And they say that these multitudes of factors are what are overlapping each other, he said, and they seem to be concentrated in the South. And so, I don't buy that. I don't get it. And we're going to, at least anecdotally, look at some other areas of the country and get some input in the next paper that will dispute the fact that these teacher shortages are concentrated in the South. And these reasons, they don't really back it up with any data. And we're going to, in the following podcast, we're going to talk about teachers and their concerns and some of the things that they are saying is causing them to want to leave the profession. And so we'll look at data and see what the teachers are actually talking about or saying. Okay, so now let's look at the study that was presented by the Vox group. This is entitled, "Is there a teacher shortage? Teacher shortages explained." And they went out and got information from lots of states. The first one they say here is Texas. Teachers are deserting the classroom at high rates, with Houston alone reporting nearly 1,000 vacancies in early August. And this is 2022. In Maryland, more than 5,500 teachers reportedly left the profession in 2022. And then in Baltimore, an estimated 600 to 700 vacancies going into the fall. Department of Education officials in Pennsylvania are calling the state shortage a crisis, and experts say the state will need thousands of new teachers by 2025. And so they're projecting out and looking at the trends in their states. Okay, and now they are reporting from Kansas. Kansas is facing what has been called the most severe teacher shortage it has ever had. About 1,400 teaching jobs are unfilled. In Florida, there are 8,000 teacher vacancies, up from 5,000 at the state of going back to the previous school year. The shortage is also reported as being dire in other states, including Nevada, California, Illinois, Arizona, and Missouri. Some experts say that even school districts that don't usually face shortages are struggling with vacancies, and it's hard for teachers to hire teachers even for subjects that are typically easy to fill. And this has been our experience in South Central Kentucky, where I'm at in Bowling Green. There are elementary school vacancies that are having to be filled from student teachers, and then in the high schools there are many underqualified teachers teaching in subject matters and filling in for those vacancies as well. So I think we're seeing kind of a nationwide teacher shortage, and like I said before, I think it's, if you look at the data, if the data is anywhere near correct, it's somewhere between 5 and 6%, and I think it's going to get worse. Let's go on and talk about some of the reasons why that we're having shortages. And the take home of this is 40% of the teachers surveyed say they are planning on leaving the profession. Meanwhile, teachers have made it plain that they are unhappy. 74% of respondents in the American Federation of Teachers survey of nearly 2,400 members were dissatisfied with the job, up from 41% in 2020. And 40% said they probably would leave the profession in the next 2 years. And we're going to go into this survey in a lot more detail in the following podcasts. Teacher shortages are nothing new. The teacher profession has been permanently plagued by shortages for the last 50 years. But what's happening this year might seem like a perfect storm. Long-term trends in profession in a healthy job market in other fields are colliding with a couple of extremely difficult years in the classroom. A mass exodus from teachers as more teachers quit and fewer newly minted educators are available to take their place. Feels like it's feels like it makes intuitive sense this year. So, kind of a combination of a long trending decrease in teacher candidates, an increase in dissatisfaction, partly brought on by the pandemic, has put a real stress on the school systems. Okay, so I'll say here the U.S. Department of Education is inept, but it is actually happening. The U.S. does not collect timely, detailed national data about teacher employment, so it's difficult to definitely conclude whether there is a national teacher shortage going into the 2022 school year. That has led practitioners, education policy experts, and union leaders talking past one another. And so, when you don't have a good source of data, people tend to cherry pick the data that supports whatever their position is. And so I think we're really seeing this. They also mentioned this working paper in the Vox report, and they go through the things that we talked about in the last section of this podcast. So, that's a good, as good as any set of data, but my problem was with some of the conclusions that they draw don't necessarily correlate to data that is being presented. Okay, so the term mass exodus was used in the previous slides, and the perspective of a mass exodus is kind of a relative term, right? It just depends on how you define it. It says here, and I highlighted a couple of sections in this paper to point out, it says the American teaching workforce is huge. In 2018, there were about 3.5 million teachers in public and charter schools. So far, there is no comprehensive national data about teacher turnover, so the understanding of teacher shortages rests on these anecdotes from individual schools, districts, and some states. And so there's a real problem collecting data, and that's why I say the Department of Education, the National Department of Education in our country is inept. I mean, what do they do? This is something that they should be zeroing in on. It's super important. And so I'm really disappointed to find out that they don't collect any data. Also, they point out in this paper Blingberg and Kraft, using both national and state level data, found that the overall employment in education has declined by about 9.3% at the onset of the pandemic and was still 4% below normal in March 2022. And so, I'm feeling more and more good about my, 5 to 6% estimate on teacher shortages. They say that now it's dropped to 4%, but I'm still sticking by my guns. I think it's about anywhere between 5 and 6% short nationwide. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. if you wish. Okay, so now let's talk about their perspective, this Vox paper's perspective on teacher dissatisfaction. They say the usual culprits for teacher dissatisfaction are ever present. About 75% of pre-K to 12 teachers who participated in the AFT survey reported that conditions have changed from the worst for the worse over the past 5 years. This is the American Federation of Teachers survey, and the reasons included workload, greater responsibility, unrealistic expectations, student behavior issues, pay that doesn't keep up with inflation, a lack of support from school leadership, and a lack of support from parents. About 74% of respondents said they would not recommend the teaching profession to a prospective teacher. Other large surveys of teachers from the National Education Association, the largest labor union in the country, and the RAND tell a similar story. While these factors have been at the root of teacher satisfaction for a long time, experts are identifying new stressors that, coupled with burnout, are pushing teachers over the edge. Okay, so we're going to take a more detailed look at this survey a little bit later. But these are some of the things that they pointed out in this paper. And it's a little contrasted to the paper, the Brown paper, in the fact that they really don't emphasize the dissatisfaction with being able to teach about social issues, about social emotional learning, and race as a focal point. And so I think a further deep dive into that might yield some good results. Okay, so they also took a look at the reasons why teachers are losing public support. And so let's read what they say. I'm going to add some things to this, I think. There's been a whiplash during the pandemic. At the beginning, teachers were celebrated and told they should be paid $1 million. Later on, they were told they were incredibly selfish, said Roosevelt of Columbia University. Teachers were viewed as heroes for being on the front lines during the early days of the pandemic, with many of them quickly transitioning to online instruction to keep the learning going. But when it came time to return to the classroom at the risk of sacrificing their health and that of their families, many teachers wanted to draw the line. The massive demoralization of teaching force is a huge problem. There are lots of indicators of teacher unhappiness and teacher expressing a desire of an intent to leave the profession, said Roosevelt. If teachers are profoundly demoralized, that's going to affect the quality of their teaching sooner or later. I guess the thing that kind of struck me about this whole thing of public support was the roles that unions played in preventing students to go back to the classroom. And there are unions and then there are unions. A lot of times when you watch the national news, you think that the National Teachers Union, the NEA, National Education Association Union, rules the roost of all teachers, and that is just not the case. There are certain areas that, especially in the big cities, where the unions really rule the schools. And we'll go over the reasons why I believe that is the case later. But basically what I think happened was that for a long time teachers were treated so unfairly that they unionized, and over time the union grew and grew in numbers and grew in influence. And unfortunately, I think they've become too powerful, and they are really an arm of the Democratic Party. They're heavily associated with the Democratic Party. In our particular area of the world, we don't have enough union members to collective bargain for our salary and working conditions. And so, and that's partly because of political reasons and partly because of the union dues. The union dues are really high and our wages are relatively low compared to folks that live in the cities. Okay, so now we're going to talk about teacher pay, and we're also going to talk about some more mitigating factors in making teachers decide that they want to give up the profession. The title of the slide here is Teachers' Pay Doesn't Keep Up. And so their conclusions here are interesting. And we'll dive into them in more detail when we look at the America Federation of Teachers survey. They say here, though salaries do influence a teacher's decision to remain in the field, they haven't historically been the biggest factor in the decision. When we analyze the data on the teacher quitting and turnover, salaries and benefits do matter, but not as much as they say. How much voice and how much support teachers say have had the biggest impact. Those kinds of factors are more frequently cited by teachers as what make them want to stay or leave. And then in the final paragraph here, they say, still the teacher pay penalty, the reality that teachers are paid less than their non-teaching college educated counterparts has gotten worse over time. A new study from the Economic Policy Institute, independent non-profit think tank, found that the weekly wages of teachers have remained static for the last 3 decades. So here it's really interesting to note that, you know, for 30 years teachers' pay have not kept up with inflation. And so, and this is a general statement, and I think, you know, if you look at a map of the country, and you can find these where, and then look at teacher pay, there are areas of the country where the pay has been pretty good. I looked up in the northeastern area, you know, Boston, Massachusetts, that area seems to have pretty good wages. And then along the coastline of California, starting about middle part of the state on up, on the coast at least, they've had a pretty good pay. But overall, the pay hasn't kept up with inflation, and that makes it extremely difficult for people to stay in the profession. And we'll look at, you know, who's teaching, who's leaving teaching in the AFT survey, and we'll see some trends there in terms of people coming into the profession. You know, the new graduates there's a high rate of turnover there, and there's a lot of factors involved in that, but one of them certainly is pay. And this autonomy issue of teachers not feeling like that they have classroom autonomy and aren't supported is also a factor in this turnover. Okay, politics becoming more of a problem is the title of this. And it says here that about 88% of teachers in the AFT survey said education is becoming too politicized where they worked, and 82% said that where they worked, educators were becoming targets of political and ideological attacks. Okay, so I think, you know, when you watch the news, no matter what source that you look at, there is a idea that teachers are either hell-bent on teaching certain about certain social issues, and that is a focus of their instruction. And I can only go by personal experience. In my teaching career, you know, there was an even-handed discussion of history and race relations and social political issues, but it really wasn't a major focus. In our particular school, the focus was on preparing students for life after school, whether that be, I was a high school teacher, whether that be going on to the university level or going into the workforce. And so, you know, these political issues, you know, we try to, you know, you can't totally avoid them, but we tried to have an even-handed discussion about both sides of issues, and there wasn't this focus on race or issues involving sexuality and so forth. And so I think that this is one of the things that is clickbait. It's controversial. People are passionate about it. And so you would think that this is a major focus of the educational process, and I don't necessarily believe that that is the case. So in the AFT survey, we will see teachers' attitudes towards these topics is dictated a lot by politics, by their own personal politics. About 70% of the teachers surveyed were Democrats and about 30% Republicans. And the only thing that they really disagreed about was the emphasis on racism in the country. The Democratic teachers tended to think that they should emphasize racism more, and then the Republican teachers thought that they should emphasize it less. And I think it'll be interesting to look at the different views of teachers by political party in that survey, and we'll take a look at that as well. Okay, so now we'll talk just a little bit about turnover rates, and this is one of the things that is going to present a substantial challenge to our teaching workforce. They say that teachers have the biggest impact on student achievement than any other factor. And, I would say that that is true, although I would also say that a good teacher involves the parents, and good schools make sure that they at least seek parental help and guidance in performing their duties. So I think, it takes a community that is dedicated to providing high quality education for their students. It says here 1/5 of new teacher hires in the country have never had any practice with kids ahead of time. Beginning teachers have among the highest rates of turnover of any other teachers. Overall, more than 44% of new teachers leave the profession within 5 years. The lower entry standards also risk deprofessionalizing the field. And so I think that this is a big challenge. Teaching is a career that a lot of people think, well, anybody can go into a classroom and teach, and that's just not the case. It takes a lot of practice. It takes experience. It takes dedication to become a good teacher. I taught for 20 years, and I remember when I first went into it, I thought I was going to save the world, and reach lots of kids, and I did. But there are a lot of things that are very discouraging in the field, and a lot of hard work and dedication is needed to overcome a lot of the obstacles that teachers face today. There's higher and higher expectations for teachers to be be able to be counselors, to be more than just presenting material. You have to be a psychologist. You have to be able to read people's minds and understand kids from lots and lots of different backgrounds. And it's a very challenging field. So we're going to end here, and then in the next podcast, we'll talk more about this AFT survey and really dig deep into what teachers are feeling and thinking. And we'll look a little bit more, and I'll try to present my ideas about teachers' unions and what role that they play, both good and bad, in our current situation. And we'll try to take a look at that. And I think after we do that, it'd be interesting to see if we can find some data from parents, and get parents' input about how they see their schools, what challenges they see the schools facing, and what they can do better to help educate their kids. So it's been fun going over this with you. I hope that you will be inspired to be part of the solution instead of being part of the problem that we face, and we all working together hopefully can turn this thing around. Peace.